answers with great breadth. Where he makes it his business to mention each one of the Rabbeim. And one of the most distinct times was Rosh Hashanah. We have what's called Seder Negunim. It's a big part of Lubavitch culture, Seder Negunim. Seder Negunim by the Rebbe was in many Farbrengen, and it started with Rosh Hashanah. From the beginning, when there was the Rosh Hashanah Farbrengen, it was very short. Farbrengen was quite short. A very long Maamar. They said a Maamar over an hour. He started it before the Shkia, and he finished it after Tzeisak Yechov, and he wanted to connect the head of the year to the year itself. And either before or after the Maamar, the Rebbe would ask to sing a nigun for each one of the Rabbeim, from the Baal Shem Tov, from the Magid, from the Alter Rebbe, from the Mittler Rebbe, from Tzemach Tzedek, from the Rebbe Marash, from the Rebbe Rashaben, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, and then of course we would add also a nigun from the Rebbe and from the Rebbe's father. One year the Rebbe actually asked on Rosh Hashanah that they should sing a nigun from each Rebbe with words, and a nigun from each Rebbe without words. So they ended up singing many more than 9 or 10. And at a certain point, they ran out of Negunim with words. You want a nigun from Baal Shem Tov with words and without words. Magid with words and without words. Alter Rebbe with words. Azay Yeder Nigun, Yeder Rebbe. Not together. First without words and then with words. But Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe always asked we should sing the Negunim of all the Rabbeim. And the Rebbe used to mention what the Gemara says. That every day in the Beis HaMikdash, they would say, Heir Pnei HaMizrach Atshe Bechevrein, that the eastern sky is lit up till the city of Chevrein. And the Chazal say the reason they said Atshe Bechevrein is to mention Schus Avos. So the Rebbe says our Chevrein is Lubavitch, Veistach, Loshen, Mezhebush, Hanepoler, Hadich, Nezhin, Lubavitch, Rostov, Queens. That's right, this is our Chevrein. So the Rebbe made a point of mentioning all the Rabbeim, the Nesiim, Rosh Hashanah, with the Negunim. The Rebbe once told a story, and in the story he mentioned 4 Rabbeim, and then he explained the reason I'm telling the story, because the Vailai Chaptarain, I mentioned the number of the Rabbeim. And in the Maamar, the Rebbe used to bring a Torah from each Rebbe. That's why we have a Torah from the Baal Shem Tov here. And the same as you'll see, throughout the Maamar, I try to circle each one, but I circled so many words, it's hard to know why I circled each word. But the Rebbe mentioned each one of the Rabbeim. On the Pasuk Ben hameitzar is El Hashem. Mishareitzel lipotem me'atzar v'hameitzar. If a person is experiencing pain and a narrowness and he wants to get out of it, Eitza hayuta, the teretz, the solution is sheyispalel Hashem yizbarach, he should daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'yodeh shezeh b'mayla. Because when you're davening to Hashem, you're admitting that the narrowness came from Him. V'yipotem me'atzar, and you'll go out of it. In other words, you have a difficult situation. If you say that this difficult situation Hashem gave me, Hashem will redeem it. Min hameitzar karasi ka. Why am I calling ka? He's the source of the min hameitzar. Therefore, anani b'mercha v'izau shakosov. Min hameitzar karasi ka. We cry out to the Eibishter from a narrow situation, knowing that He's in the narrowness. And then anani b'mercha ka. That the Eibishter answers us from that same place. V'izau shakosov hini Mitzrayim lo shen meitzar v'tzar nesei achareim. The Mitzrayim were chasing Yidden. And Oz Hevinu Zeh, Yidden understood that not only they're in a bad situation, but that bad situation came from the Eibishter. And therefore, Lekach Vayitzku B'nei Yisrael El Avaya, they cry out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ube'emes Nemeraz, and of course the end was, Kasher Yisem Etz Mitzrayim Hayem, that the fact that they saw Egypt on that day, I'm never going to see them again, now, because Ayedeher Yesh HaMeitzar V'Akriya Min HaMeitzar, when you feel the narrowness and you cry out from the narrowness, Nasa Anani B'Mercha. So the tenet to the question was, how could a Yid whose life so good come to Skiyas and scream in hameitzar? And the tenet has 2 parts. You see, you came late in the introduction. I already gave all the shmooze. I'll repeat it again. Yeah? The tenet has 2 parts. The first part of the tenet is, no matter what world you're in, no matter how good your life is, compared to a world higher, you can scream in hameitzar. But there's a problem. The problem is that a person whose problems are edel, are fine, cannot scream with the same tishkis, with the same intensity, as a person whose life is very difficult. So it's true that in every world there's min hameitzar, that the Rebbe says later in the Maamar, that the breadth, the width of the lower shofar is narrower than the narrowness of the higher shofar. It's all relative. So no matter what world you're in, you can scream in hameitzar. The problem is, when you scream because you have real tzaddis, you cry from a very deep place. When you're screaming because you have edel tzaddis, it's very hard to scream with the same intensity. So now comes the second part of the teretz, and we're going to skip, please. I want you to go to page Yud Gimel. Okay? In my view, this paragraph, Tes, should have been right after paragraph Daled. After Daled, they should have put Tes. But okay, no one's asking me. V'yesh lahoisef bazeh, number 16. V'yesh lahoisef, tell me when you have the place. V'yesh lahoisef bazeh v'mashakosav atzamach tzedik b'neshim hoisav. I want to add what the tzamach tzedik says in the pasuk v'nameis. Dehine. Shofet hu bina. Shofet is bina. Skip the bracket. The imken yipale, the question is, Eich be bina shayik echad tzidi echad tzad. How could bina be narrow on one side? Al shemin hameitzar. Hare bina droir. You know what droir means? Free. Alma dechiru, free. Skip the bracket again. Ubechinas meitzar shayich b'malchus. Malchus is meitzar. So how could bina scream? Now, bina is not perfect. Chochmah is better than bina. But bina is also free. So if Bina is free and she looks up at Chochmah and says, Chochmah is whatever Chochmah is, better than me. So she wants to have what Chochmah has. But to cry min hameitzar, it has to hurt. How is Bina hurting? So the Rebbe gives a moed in the Keteret. And he explains, Bina, Sheifet's like in Bina. And when you're holding in Bina, the narrowness should not warrant a guttural, visceral cry of pain. Because even though it's not the highest madrega, Bina is a pretty good level. Just like we say by the Eibishter, that when we're in pain, he's in pain. And he cries out because of our cry. Bina cries out because of the cry of Malchus. Save Simen Chaf, Kapitel Chaf. On the pasuk Yan Chadashem b'Yein Tzara, Hashem answers when you have tzaras. And the second pasuk he brings is Ima Nechi b'Tzara, 3 lines from the bottom. Amar Rab Yudin. He brings a mashal. Leisha shehi im ima v'chula. A woman is in labor, and her mother came to the hospital with her. Ubishas leidosa hoisa mitzavechas mamata, and the daughter goes into labor. She screams. Ve'ima shemas kela malmaila. The mother hears the cry above. And she screams with her daughter. Bina is a higher hay. Bina is shayfer, but the narrowness of Bina is called free and rich. But she hears Magia Tzar Bita Shehi HaMalchus. She hears the cry at the level below. Turn to page Yudalid now. And because she hears the cry of her daughter, she also cries. And I just want to add a little psychology to it. A mother hears her daughter cry, so she's upset. But Al Pi Chasidus, the idea is, the mother knows that the tzara that her daughter is going through is because of her. I don't chas v'shol mean. Here we have only tzaddikim. The vart is, Ishtalshus is levels. The problem starts on the very highest levels. If the highest level is perfect, the lowest level is also perfect. The fact that on the lowest levels, you have basic, gross, gigantic, massive tzoros, is because in the highest world you have an eidelitzah. So when the mother hears her daughter cry, the mother understands and appreciates that the source of the daughter's pain is a dakas de kechasarin in her level. So she's not only crying because her daughter is crying. She's crying because she projects that the source of the daughter's lower min hameitzar is her finer min hameitzar. So she's experiencing the pain of her daughter the way her daughter experiences the pain. But she has a certain degree of liability. And therefore, she's crying because her meitzar is the source of the real meitzar. The way He was at Rosh Yeshiva. He was asking Tziburi. He was helping the whole community. And every week, twice a week, he gave a shiur to two go'onim in Kotchim. There were two chevre who sat day and night and learned. One was called Har, another was called Klotz. The one was called Klotz because he sat on a piece of wood till he carved out a chair. The other was called Har because his back was like a rainbow from sitting over a Gemara. And he gave them twice a week a shiur in Kotchim. So somebody said to the Beis Halevi, to Yosef Dave Halevi, Soloveitchik, you're so busy. They're not going to miss your shiur. They're not going to miss your shiur. They're go'odim. So he said, if I stop giving them their shiur, the tailor in Paris will become a Christian. The tailor in Paris. He was Rav and Brisk. So they said to him, what does the tailor in Paris have to do with Yosef Horeb and Chatzkel Klotz, or whatever the names were? So he gave the teretz, what Reagan used to call trickle-down. This trickle-down economics, this trickle-down Judaism. When the person on the highest level, like Adam and Chava, their whole chesed was that they served Hashem and they felt themselves. So, after the Chet Tzadas. Before the Chet, they didn't feel themselves, that's called Bilti Morgesh. After the Chet, they did feel themselves, which is called Morgesh. But the way that goes down through the generations, you get to a person who feels only himself, doesn't feel the Eibishter at all. So he says, if I'm going to stop giving this shiur, their quality of learning is going to drop a drop. But the people who are inspired by them are going to be dropping a little bit more. And it's a chain. The tailor in Paris who doesn't fast Yom Kippur, who does living with a goy Rachmana litzlan, but the one thing he won't do is shmad, will say, okay, I can cross that line also. So that's the min hameitzar. Whatever level you're on, there's still a narrowness by you. Ach b'shefer cotton, the small shefer, which is the lower level. Hameitzar, hu tzar mamish. It's taka hard. I will also love it when Mashiach is going to come. Sheyi is gal shefer gadol. This is going to be the shefer of Bina. Now the shefer of Bina says the Rebbe, gam hamalchus afal pi shehitzar. It's keneged hareichev de Bina. When you have a shefer gadol, the narrow end is as wide as the wide end of the shefer below. And then we're going to blow shefer on a higher madreg. What is the pshat? The pshat is that la'asad love, we're going to fix up the small chesreinas. The motivation for fixing up the small chesreinas is going to be the sound of the shefer gadol. But if your motivation to fix the little things, the shefer gadol, how deeply can you cry? And the teretz is, when the shefer gadol knows that the darkest chesreinis of the shefer gadol are the source of the tsar miyoid of the shefer gadol, he can cry like that as well. The Rebbe answers, madregas has many levels. The narrowness of a higher level. The narrowness I says, Mama, you walked all the way here. Welcome to the Shir. Welcome to the Shir. Yeah. The lower levels of Ishtalshlus come from the higher level of Ishtalshlus, you see that my small chesed is the source of his big chesed. So you could cry like him. That's the minute you could cry like he cries. That's the word, the way I understand. And the Rebbe says, the same is for Rabbi Hashem. Page Yud Dalid, middle paragraph. I'm about 10 lines from the end by the asterisks. Your life is good. Nevertheless, yesh to in shall kriya min hameitzar, you could cry out from the narrowness. Why? Because in your hameitzar ubechol madregi lefiyerka. Every min hameitzar is in each world according to its own worth. When you cry out from your level of narrowness, you achieve a breath, but that brings you to a higher level of narrowness, which allows you to cry again. First, a person has to go out of being narrow, because he's grub. Chumrius means crude. The Rebbe says in Yiddish, a person goes out of a grubkeit, and he comes into gashmis, which isn't chumrius. Then you make from the physical, spiritual. Because the breath of gashmis is narrow compared to ruchnis. You go higher and higher still. That way Yid has a right to demand. That also when godliness things should be broad. Because a person feels no matter how high he is. It's still narrow compared to a higher mercha, the mercha of Ka. And here the Rebbe says, Beis Hamam Yudke. See, I skipped a bunch. I skipped the whole Yudke Vavke shtickle, which I'm going to do. Either I'll do it tomorrow at home, or I'll do it, I don't know, Tuesday. Here, we'll figure out how I'm going to continue this Maamar. I skipped the piece. What the Rebbe says, Yudke Vavke, is the source of all the trouble. with a narrower tip, a much wider tip. The narrow end is much wider. But he feels, or she feels, the narrowness of the sheifa below. So on the one hand, you're talking about great tzaddikim doing tshuva. On the other hand, because those tzaddikim see the connection between themselves and everybody else, it's a tshuva like as if they're doing tshuva like a pashat yid. That's the spirit of the Maamar. So Mashiach is going to come, Shefa Gadol. And again, if I'm not incorrect, this means only when Mashiach comes can you be on a high level and still cry out min hameitzar. Says Rebbe, you have to say that this idea that after Mashiach comes, the highest levels are also doing tshuva, they're screaming min hameitzar, is now also a simple raya. Sharei, posuk, v'hoya, b'yemahu, top of Tezvav now, you talk about Shefa Gadol, who echad mepsuke shefres. They put it into the psukim of shefres, right? The Gemara has a whole lump, the end of Masechet Rosh Hashanah, that you have to have a minimum of 3. For Malchus to have 1 from Teireh, 1 from Nevi'im, 1 from Ksubim, and the same is true Shefres, and the same is true Zechrenis. And then the Gemara figures out what pasuk to use. Lapel, we have 10 of each. You have 3 Teireh, 3 Ksuvim. I don't know why Ksuvim comes before Nevi'im. 3 Nevi'im. If you look at the Machzor, first it says of a dividend kochcha, cost of labor, this is Ksuvim. And then it says Vayedei Avadecha Nevi'im. And then the last pasuk is again from Chumash. Yeah? Included, and the Gemara discusses what counts as a pasuk of Malchus, what doesn't count, what counts as a pasuk of Zecheres, and what doesn't count, and they count this pasuk. Why are we saying V'haya b'yeimu? You talk about Shefa Gadol, if their Shefa Gadol is after all the tshuvas anybody ever did? Yeah, is Mizem Muchach second life? This is proof. Shagam b'Shefa the Ata, even now in the Shefa Yeshne Me'ein, the Shefa Hagadol. There's something like the Shefa Hagadol. Shalachein Ef Shalahavi pasuk Zeh Benigel the Shefa the Ata. We can say it now also. What's the lesson? No matter what level a person is on, you have to feel the narrowness, and there's 2 parts. The first pshat is the level above yourself. But the deeper part is that when you feel the narrowness compared to the level above yourself, you sense that that's the source of the cry of the daughter. And you're able to cry like her. Okay, this is the Maamar. Now I want to go back, please, to page Yud Gimel. Go back 1 page, and I want to read one more idea. And the rest of this Maamar, I'm doing in a 3rd class. Okay, so I stopped on the bottom of have Tes, Yud, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis. I didn't do, but I want to do the top of Yud Gimel. For Yuvan, this idea that the merchav of one is the meitzar of the next, and the meitzar of the next is the merchav of the second, and the meitzar of the third, and then the second point, which I think is so poignant, that you hear the daughter crying, and you know that the daughter's pain is rooted in the higher madregas chesaron, and you can cry like her. So he brings a classic idea. You know this from other Maimonim, I'm just going to read it to you. A king comes into a country. He has duchsin, v'ifrechin, all kinds of machers. And all of these people sit in the middle, and they're hosting them. Chad Omar, one says, I'm going to host a duke. Chad Omar, I'm going to host an ifrich. Chad Omar, and one says, I'm going to host another kind of officer. One guy is very smart. Omar, he says, I'm going to host the king. He said, what's the kasha? It's a no-brainer. Of course you're going to host the king. What's the teretz? These Sarim serve the king. Their whole Metzias is what the king wants. So if I'm hosting a Sar, through that Sar I have the Melech. Now, if the Sarim are Malachim are not perfect. But if the Sarim are Sfiris of Elkus, what's wrong with hosting Chesed of Atzilis rather than hosting the Eibishter himself? And you have to have a big pikach, such a smart guy to understand that non-Nesiv Malka. The teretz is that if you relate to the Eibishter through any medium, it could be the finest and the highest. It's a medium. And it creates bedaka min adaka min hameitzar. How terrible is that? So the teretz is the min hameitzar, bedaka min adaka, this is the source of the daughter's cry. So it takes a very smart person to say, my relationship with the king has to be perfect. It can't be 99.9%. So take, all of these helpers are very important, chavre. But you have to have a relationship with the Melech himself. I'm reading it inside. The Lecheira, they have a poshet. Of course it makes sense. Shesar v'duchs eina magim l'malas hamelech. You have to be smart. The teretz is, Shamelach atzmei nimshach haba gitzach hareis gam b'shem elokim b'shem havaya. The duchsim, the startilutin, are shemis. They're Hashem's names. They're not the malachim. They're the svidus. Okay, skip the parenthesis. V'lachen yesh tzedek b'pikach, someone very smart who should understand that even though I'm serving Hashem and it's achdus, but I'm serving Hashem through a medium, through ishtalshalos, b'dakas, it's a hameitzar. And if ishtalshalos ended with me, it wouldn't be so bad. But I know that by the daughter, it's going to be worse. Sheyivcha b'melech atzmei, choose the king himself. Because he feels. Shekola and yonim shemshacha me'amelech. Anything, if you can get it straight from the king, if you get it from somebody else, it's narrow compared to getting it from the king himself. Shem Havaya is Hashem's name. Shem Havaya reveals ain't safe, but it has a vavke. Sha'af sha'as chalasei b'yutke, harei ze nimshach achakach b'vavke she'einei be'erech, and vavke, as great as it is, compared to yutke, is min hameitzar. And the Rebbe's argument is that the chesaron in the vavke is the beginning of all the lower min hameitzars. This is a gewaldige insight into a pasuk. A person's on a very high level, but he knows that by somebody else there's a much lower level. And he understands trickle down, that the lowest chesaron is rooted in the highest chesaron. So he not only can also cry out, he can cry out like that other person cries out. Okay? So, well, because there's the ikir is the cry, not the blame. It's not even a cry of tshuva. It's a cry for help. It's a cry, it's not a cry of tshuva, it's a cry for breath. The cry accomplishes that the Eibishter answers. That's the answer. The cry accomplishes that the Eibishter answers. I'm giving a shit to my students. So there's the famous Moshe from the Baal Shem Tov at Kiyas about the son who was abandoned from his father. He forgot the language. He speaks a foreign tongue, but he screams. And his father recognizes his voice. So the Rebbe Marash said once that in the Moshe of the Baal Shem Tov of the child screaming, it's not that he recognizes his tone, it's the shout, it's the gishrei. That's Kiyas Shefer. Okay.